The ruins stretched endlessly beneath an alien sky, their broken spires reaching toward clouds that had forgotten the color of anything but ash. This world had been abandoned long ago, its name lost to the Imperium's endless archives, another casualty in the eternal grinding of galactic war. The fortress monastery that once dominated the landscape had crumbled into something barely recognizable, its proud halls now home only to the wind and the slow decay of millennia. But ruins attract scavengers, and in the grim darkness of the far future, no scavengers are more persistent, more opportunistic, or more dangerous than the Orks. The warband that descended upon this forgotten world wasn't particularly large by greenskin standards, perhaps 300 strong, led by a war boss named WH40K. They'd been drawn here by the promise of good scrap and better fights. The orbital augurs had detected massive metal signatures beneath the rubble, the kind that spoke of Imperial technology waiting to be liberated. For the Orks, this was better than a birthday, because Orks don't have birthdays, they have loot. The digging had been going on for days. Gretchen swarmed through the wreckage like green insects, hauling away chunks of broken ceramite and twisted metal, while their larger cousins oversaw the operation with the kind of brutal efficiency that only Orks can manage. They'd already uncovered several promising finds. A cache of bolter ammunition that still functioned despite being older than some human civilizations, pieces of power armor that would look dead good when welded to a battle wagon, and enough scrap metal to keep the mech boys happy for months. But it was on the 5th day that they found something truly special. The chamber was deep, buried beneath layers of collapsed stone and fused rockcrete. When the Gretchen finally broke through, they found themselves in what must have once been a sacred space. The walls bore faded frescoes depicting ancient battles, their details worn away by time, but their grandeur still evident. Candles that had guttered out centuries ago lined the perimeter, their wax pooled and hardened into strange formations. And at the center, standing in a recessed alcove like a statue of some forgotten god, was the Dreadnought. Even covered in dust and debris, even silent and still as a tomb, the war machine radiated menace. It stood nearly twice the height of an Ork, its armored carapace massive and imposing. One arm terminated in a weapon system that the Gretchen didn't recognize, while the other bore a power fist large enough to crush a man whole. Purity seals hung from its chassis, their prayers faded to illegibility, and across its chest plate was emblazoned the heraldry of a chapter whose name had been worn smooth by the passage of ages. The Gretchen that found it immediately fled to tell the others, and within the hour, the chamber was filled with Orks. WH40K pushed his way to the front, his massive frame forcing the other boys aside as he approached the dormant machine. He was a big one, even by Ork standards, his muscles enhanced by crude cybernetics and his skull reinforced with plates of looted Imperial armor. More importantly, he was Kunin, which in Ork terms meant he had just enough brains to be dangerous. He circled the Dreadnought slowly, his beady eyes taking in every detail, his mind already racing with possibilities. This was old tech, really old, and it was big, really big. The kind of big that made other gits respect you, the kind of big that could crump anything that got in your way. WH40K didn't know exactly what he was looking at, but he knew it was important. He knew it was powerful, and most importantly, he knew it was now his. What WH40K had found, what none of the Orks truly understood as they gathered around their discovery with greedy eyes and grasping hands, was one of the Imperium's most sacred relics. They had discovered a sleeping giant, an ancient warrior who had been resting in the darkness for longer than any of them could comprehend. They had found a Dreadnought, and in doing so, they had set in motion a chain of events that would prove that sometimes the most dangerous loot is the kind that can wake up. To understand what happens when Orks encounter a dormant Dreadnought, we first need to understand what a Dreadnought truly is. Because these machines are not simply vehicles or weapons platforms. They are prisons and they are temples. They are tombs for the living and monuments to the dead. They are one of the Imperium's greatest honors and one of its cruelest fates. A Space Marine Dreadnought is a walking sarcophagus, a massive combat walker that houses the broken body of a warrior too valuable to let die. When a Space Marine suffers wounds so catastrophic that even the advanced medical technology of the Imperium cannot save him, when his body has been shattered beyond the ability of bionics to repair, he faces a choice. He can die with honor, his gene seed harvested for the next generation, his name added to the rolls of the fallen, or he can continue to serve. The process of internment is as much ritual as it is surgery. The mortally wounded Space Marine is placed in a cybernetic sarcophagus, a life support system more advanced than anything the Imperium uses for its regular citizens. This sarcophagus becomes his entire world. The remnants of his body, what little remains after battle has taken its toll, are suspended in amniotic fluid, thick and cold, filling his lungs as he breathes. Neural interfaces connect directly to his brain, allowing him to control the Dreadnought as if it were his own body, to feel its weapons as extensions of his will. The sarcophagus is then installed into the chassis of the Dreadnought itself, a walking tank made of ceramite and adamantium, materials so strong they can withstand weapons that would reduce lesser vehicles to molten slag. The Dreadnought's armored shell is built to last, to endure centuries of warfare, to carry its precious cargo through battles that would destroy armies. Some Dreadnought chassis have survived for 10,000 years or more, passing from one fallen warrior to another as the centuries grind forward. The weapons mounted on a Dreadnought are devastating. One arm typically bears a close combat weapon, a massive power fist or chain fist capable of tearing through enemy armor like paper, of crushing tanks and smashing through fortifications. The other arm carries a ranged weapon, anything from an assault cannon that spits hundreds of rounds per minute to a lascannon that can punch through the heaviest armor at extreme range. Some Dreadnoughts carry missile launchers on their shoulders, or heavy flamers, or plasma cannons. They are walking arsenals, mobile fortresses of destruction. But the true weapon of a Dreadnought is the warrior inside. These are not ordinary Space Marines. To be chosen for internment in a Dreadnought, a warrior must have proven himself beyond question. He must have demonstrated valor and skill worthy of being preserved for future generations. He must be a hero whose loss would diminish the chapter, whose knowledge and experience are too valuable to waste. Captains, chaplains, veterans of countless campaigns, these are the warriors who earn the dubious honor of eternal service. And eternal it truly is. For a Dreadnought does not age. The life support systems can sustain a Space Marine indefinitely, keeping his organic components alive and functional for centuries, for millennia. The warrior inside does not grow old, does not sicken, does not die unless his sarcophagus is breached. He simply endures, fighting battle after battle, war after war, watching as everything he once knew fades into history. This is where the true horror of the Dreadnought becomes apparent, because while the body may be preserved, the mind is not immune to the passage of time. Extended neural interface with a machine as complex as a Dreadnought causes immense mental stress. Confusion, lethargy, dyschronometria, the inability to properly perceive time, these afflictions plague the pilots. Some experience senility, their ancient minds finally succumbing to the weight of centuries. Others maintain their faculties but lose their humanity bit by bit, becoming more machine than man with each passing year. To prevent this deterioration, or at least to slow it, Dreadnoughts are not kept constantly active. When they are not needed for battle, when their chapter has no immediate use for their considerable power, they are returned to the chapter's fortress monastery. There, in chambers deep within the sacred halls, they are placed into stasis. The tech marines who tend to them, those specialists who understand the mysteries of the machine, perform sacred rituals of preservation. They anoint the chassis with blessed oils and unguents, chanting litanies as ancient as the Imperium itself. And then, with prayers and reverence, they put the Dreadnought to sleep. This is not the sleep of mortals where dreams provide escape and rest brings renewal. This is stasis sleep, a state of suspended animation where consciousness fades to nothing and time loses all meaning. For the warrior inside, it is as close to death as he will ever come, a void of nothingness that swallows years, decades, centuries. When he wakes, he does not remember sleeping. The world has changed around him. Faces he knew are gone. Brothers he fought beside have returned to dust. But for him, it feels like only a moment has passed. The duration of these sleeps varies. Some dreadnoughts are awakened frequently, roused for major battles, or when their advice is needed in matters of chapter governance. These warriors maintain a connection to the present, their memories more recent, their minds less fragmented. But others sleep for extended periods, awakened only in the direst need. These ancient ones, called venerable dreadnoughts, have seen centuries or millennia of slumber. They are living history, warriors who remember times long past, whose experience spans epochs. The oldest known dreadnought in the Imperium is Bjorn the Fell-Handed, a warrior of the Space Wolves chapter. Bjorn fought during the Great Crusade, that legendary time when the Emperor himself walked among men, when the Primarchs led their legions in the conquest of the galaxy. He fought during the Horus Heresy, that terrible civil war that nearly destroyed everything the Imperium had built, and he still serves, more than 10,000 years later, awakened only once every 1,000 years, or when his chapter faces its gravest threats. 10 millennia of service, of sleep and war, of watching the Imperium change and decay around him. Bjorn is exceptional, but he is not unique. Every chapter that has existed for any length of time possesses dreadnoughts whose service spans centuries. The Imperial Fists have ancient Clytor. The Blood Angels have dreadnoughts that fought under their Primarch Sanguinius. The Dark Angels guard secrets in the minds of their most ancient warriors. These beings are more than soldiers. They are living relics, connections to a past that grows more mythical with each passing generation. When a dreadnought sleeps, its chamber becomes a shrine. The Tech Marines tend to it with religious devotion, maintaining the sacred machine, ensuring that when the time comes for awakening, the ancient warrior will be ready. Other Space Marines visit these chambers to pay their respects, to seek wisdom from the sleeping ancients, even though they cannot respond, to remember that service to the Emperor transcends even death. But what happens when a dreadnought sleeps not in a sacred chamber under the watchful eyes of Tech Marines, but in a forgotten ruin on an abandoned world? What happens when the chapter that created it has fallen, its fortress monastery destroyed, its warriors scattered or slain? What happens when the rituals of awakening are forgotten, when the prescribed time for rousing has passed uncounted, when the machine simply continues its eternal vigil in the darkness, waiting for orders that will never come? This is how dreadnoughts become lost. The Imperium is vast beyond comprehension, spanning 1,000,000 worlds across the galaxy. Wars rage on thousands of fronts simultaneously. Chapters are destroyed, their home worlds razed, their records lost to the flames of conflict. In the chaos of retreat or the devastation of defeat, dreadnoughts can be left behind, their stasis chambers buried beneath rubble, their exact locations forgotten in the confusion of war. Sometimes, these lost dreadnoughts are recovered. Search parties dispatched by the Adeptus Mechanicus or remnants of the original chapter find them and bring them home. The ancient warrior is awakened, his systems checked, his weapons blessed, and he returns to service. But other times, the recovery never comes. The world is marked as lost, deemed too dangerous or too unimportant to reclaim. The dreadnought remains in its tomb, power cells keeping it in stasis, systems maintaining minimal function, the warrior inside locked in an endless sleep that may never end. Our dreadnought, the one that Gutsmek Iron Teef and his warband have discovered, is one of these forgotten warriors. The chapter that created him, whose heraldry is worn smooth on his chassis, has been extinct for over 2,000 years. They made their last stand on this very world, fighting against a foe whose nature has been lost to history. The fortress monastery was destroyed in the final battle, the chapter's gene seed lost or corrupted beyond recovery. The few survivors scattered to other chapters or died in the decades that followed. In the chaos of that last battle, in the desperate fighting as the chapter made its final stand, this particular dreadnought was damaged. Not destroyed, not disabled, but damaged enough that its systems defaulted to preservation mode. It retreated to its designated chamber, deep within the monastery's vaults, and entered emergency stasis, its combat protocols dictating that it should await either recovery by tech marines or the restoration of command authority. But no recovery came. No tech marines arrived to perform the rituals of awakening. No commanders issued orders for its deployment. The power cells, designed to last for centuries, continued their slow discharge. The life support systems maintained their precious cargo, and the warrior inside, a veteran whose name we may never know, whose deeds are recorded nowhere but in his own fading memory, slept on in the darkness. For 2,000 years he has waited. 2,000 years of dreamless sleep, while the galaxy turned and wars raged and empires rose and fell. 2,000 years while the fortress above him crumbled, while time and weather wore away the stonework, while his chapter passed from memory into legend and from legend into myth. 2,000 years of silence, of stillness, of waiting for orders that would never arrive, until the Orks came digging. Now, to understand what happens next, we need to understand the Orks themselves, because these greenskins are not like other races in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. They don't operate on the same logic, don't follow the same rules, don't even perceive reality in quite the same way as everyone else. Orks are living weapons, created eons ago by a race called the Old Ones, as soldiers in a war that predates human civilization by millions of years. They were designed to fight, programmed at a genetic level to excel at violence and destruction. But their creators are long gone, and the Orks have outlived them, spreading across the galaxy like a green tide that no force has ever been able to stem. Physically, Orks are formidable. They're large, typically standing taller than a human and far broader, with muscle mass that would make a bodybuilder weep with envy. Their green skin is incredibly tough, able to shrug off injuries that would kill lesser beings. They possess a remarkable healing factor, able to recover from wounds at a speed that seems almost magical. Cut off an Ork's arm and he'll complain about it for a few minutes before getting back to the fight. Their internal biology is partially fungal, which gives them this incredible resilience and also explains how they reproduce. Orks don't have traditional reproduction. Instead, they spread through spores, microscopic fungal elements that they constantly shed throughout their lives, and especially upon death. These spores take root in soil and begin to grow, first producing simple fungus and moss, then small creatures called squigs that feed on this growth. Then the smaller subspecies like snotlings and Gretchen, who tend to the developing ecosystem. And finally, the Orks themselves. This means that any planet where Orks have been, any battlefield where they've fought and died, becomes infested with their spores. Kill an Ork, and you've potentially created 100 more. The only way to truly cleanse a world of Ork contamination is through exterminatus, the complete destruction of all life on the planet. But what makes Orks truly unique, what elevates them from mere brutish aliens to something genuinely terrifying, is their collective psychic field. Orks possess a form of Gestalt psychic power that affects reality itself. When enough Orks believe something strongly enough, it becomes true. This is not metaphor or superstition. It is a measurable phenomenon that has baffled the tech priests of the Mechanicus for millennia. If Orks believe that painting a vehicle red makes it go faster, then red vehicles driven by Orks genuinely do go faster. The effect is measurable, quantifiable. If they believe that a gun will work, even though it has no ammunition, or is missing critical components, the gun will fire anyway. Their technology operates on a principle that can only be described as weaponized belief, where sufficient conviction overcomes the laws of physics through sheer psychic force. This gestalt field is what allows Ork technology to function despite being, by any rational standard, completely impossible. Ork weapons are cobbled together from scrap metal and spare parts, held together with rivets and wishful thinking. By all rights, they shouldn't work. A human trying to fire an Ork gun would find it jamming, exploding, or simply failing to operate. But in the hands of an Ork, convinced that his shooter will put holes in the enemy, it does exactly that. The bullets fly, the targets fall, and the laws of engineering weep quietly in a corner. This psychic phenomenon has a name, one that encompasses the entirety of Ork culture and psychology. It's called the Green Tide Crusade, the Warpath, the Great Gathering. In the Ork language, it's a single word that must be shouted at maximum volume to be properly pronounced. But we'll use a synonym, the Great Horde. The Great Horde is what happens when an Ork population reaches critical mass and a dominant war boss appears to lead them. It begins small, perhaps with a single Ork who has a vision of great carnage, who sees in his dreams the galaxy burning and enemies falling in heaps. He shares this vision with other Orks through the traditional method of repeated blows to the head, or if he's of a more intellectual bent, by building a massive war machine that embodies his ambitions. Word spreads. Other Orks are drawn to the growing horde like moths to a flame. Warbands that have been fighting each other put aside their differences, at least temporarily, to join something larger. The psychic field grows stronger as more greenskins gather, feeding on itself in a self-reinforcing cycle. The Orks become more aggressive, more unified, more dangerous, and when the critical mass is finally achieved, the Great Horde is launched upon the galaxy in an orgy of violence that won't end until the Orks are defeated or there's nothing left to fight. But the Great Horde is more than just a military campaign. It's a cultural phenomenon, a religious experience, a state of being that defines what it means to be an Ork. Because Orks exist for combat. They don't fight because they hate their enemies or because they have some grand strategic objective. They fight because fighting is what they do. It's what brings them joy, what gives their lives meaning, what makes them feel truly alive. To an Ork, peace is not a goal, but a curse. The idea of a universe without war is not paradise but hell. An eternity of boredom with nothing to crump and no enemies to fight. When Orks see the Imperium building fortifications, they don't understand that these are defensive structures meant to keep attackers out. They assume the humans are building them to provide a good scrap, to create interesting tactical challenges. The concept that someone might build a fortress because they don't want to fight simply doesn't compute in the Orkish brain. This brings us to one of the most important aspects of Ork psychology. They genuinely don't understand that other species don't enjoy fighting as much as they do. To an Ork, war is the greatest party in the universe, and they're confused and a little bit insulted when their opponents don't seem to be having fun. Why is that Humie running away? Don't he know this is a good scrap? Why is that pointy-ear git using all them fancy tactics instead of just charging in and having a go? Don't make no sense. Ork society is structured around a simple principle: might makes right. The biggest Ork is in charge, and anyone who doesn't like it is welcome to try and prove otherwise. This leads to a constant churn of leadership as ambitious Orks challenge their superiors. Successful bosses grow larger from the violence and respect, and unsuccessful challengers get squashed. An Ork boss who grows weak or shows cowardice won't remain in charge for long. His own nobs, the elite warriors who serve under him, will remedy the situation with brutal efficiency. But while Ork society may seem anarchic, it has structure. Not all Orks are simple fighters. Within their genetic code, information is encoded that produces specialist Orks with innate knowledge of specific tasks. These specialists are called odd boys, and they form the functional core that keeps Ork society from collapsing into complete chaos. The most important odd boys for our story are the mech boys. These are the orc mechanics and engineers, warriors who possess an instinctive understanding of technology. A mech boy doesn't need to be taught how to build a gun or fix an engine. He knows it at a genetic level, the knowledge programmed into his very cells by the old ones countless eons ago. Give a mech boy a pile of scrap and some tools, and he'll build you a working vehicle, a functioning weapon, a piece of technology that by all rights shouldn't exist, but somehow does. Mech boys are essential to orc warfare because they're the ones who build and maintain the technology that allows orcs to fight on equal terms with more advanced races. They create the guns, the vehicles, the war machines that the other orcs use to prosecute their endless conflicts. And more importantly for our purposes, they're the ones who modify looted technology, taking enemy equipment and making it proper orky. Because looting is central to orc culture. Orcs love nothing more than taking something from the enemy and using it against them. It's not just practical, though it certainly is that. It's also deeply satisfying on a psychological level. Using an enemy's own gun to shoot them appeals to the orcish sense of humor and justice. They took something from us, so we took something from them and made it better. That's only fair, innit? The Death Skulls clan has elevated looting to an art form. These blue-painted orcs are notorious for their ability to liberate equipment from anyone, including their fellow orcs. They pride themselves on their salvage operations, often looting vehicles during the very battle in which they were destroyed. A Death Skull mech boy can strip an enemy tank, repair it, and have it back in operation before the battle is even over. This talent has made them both respected and despised by other orcs, who appreciate their results, but don't appreciate when their own stuff goes missing. The spectrum of what orcs will loot is essentially unlimited. Guns, armor, ammunition, vehicles, buildings, fuel, wealth, people. If it's not nailed down, an orc will take it. And if it is nailed down, he'll take the nails too. They've looted Lehman Russ battle tanks and turned them into looted wagons, festooned with additional guns and painted in garish colors. They've stolen Chimera transports and converted them into troop carriers. They've even looted Imperial Knights, those massive war machines that normally require years of training to pilot, and somehow gotten them operational through sheer orcish stubbornness and psychic belief. When an orc loots something, he doesn't keep it in its original configuration. That wouldn't be proper. Instead, he customizes it, modifies it, makes it orky. This means adding more weapons, because you can never have enough dakka. It means welding on armor plates in random configurations, creating a patchwork appearance that would make an engineer weep. It means painting it in orcish colors, usually with crude glyphs and symbols that advertise the owner's clan and allegiance. And it means adding bits and pieces that serve no functional purpose but look dead good, like spikes and horns and skulls. The mech boys who perform these modifications work with an intuitive understanding that borders on the supernatural. They don't use blueprints or follow standardized procedures. They simply know what needs to be done. Their genetically encoded knowledge guiding their hands as they work. The result is technology that makes no sense to outside observers, but functions perfectly well for the orcs who use it. This brings us back to our stranded Dreadnought and the orcs who have discovered it. Because to understand what happens next, we need to imagine the scenario from both perspectives. From the Dreadnought's point of view, assuming it could perceive anything in its current state, the situation would be beyond comprehension. This ancient warrior, who fell in battle defending his chapter's fortress against an enemy long forgotten, has been programmed to await recovery by authorized tech marines. His combat protocols are clear. Remain in stasis until reactivation codes are received from proper Imperial authority. He is a weapon awaiting orders, a soldier maintaining discipline even in unconsciousness. But from the orc perspective, this is the best kind of treasure. It's big, which means it's important. It's covered in armor, which means it's tough. It's got guns, which means it's dangerous. And it's just sitting there, waiting to be claimed. The fact that it's clearly Imperial technology only makes it better, because the Orks have learned through hard experience that Imperial stuff is usually well made and deadly when properly applied. Gutsmek Iron Teeth, the war boss who leads this particular warband, recognizes that he's found something special. He's fought Space Marines before, seen their dreadnoughts in action, watched these walking tanks tear through Ork lines with contemptuous ease. He knows how dangerous they are, how much respect they command on the battlefield. And now he has one of his own. Or at least, he will once his mech boys figure out how to get it working. The mech boys approach the dormant dreadnought with a mixture of reverence and greed. These specialists, 3 of them in total, are the best Gutsmek's warband has to offer. The lead mech boy, a grizzled veteran named Scarfang, who's more metal than flesh at this point, circles the machine slowly. His augmented eyes, replaced with crude optical scanners of his own design, scan the dreadnought's surface, while his brain processes what he's seeing. Scarfang has worked on Imperial technology before. He's looted Rhino transports and Lehman Rust tanks, stripped down Space Marine armor for useful bits, even examined a damaged Land Raider that his clan captured 3 years ago. But this is different. This is more sophisticated, more complex, more dangerous. The craftsmanship is beyond anything he's encountered. The armor plating alone is thicker than what he usually sees, and the weapon systems are integrated in ways that suggest capabilities far beyond standard Imperial vehicles. He can tell the machine is in some kind of sleep mode. Power readings are minimal but present. A trickle of energy maintaining basic functions. The dreadnought isn't dead, it's dormant, and that means it might be possible to wake it up. The question is whether that would be a good idea. The other 2 mech boys join Scarfang in his examination. Grubnuts is younger but talented, known for his ability to coax function out of even the most damaged salvage. Rustgut is older, more cautious, with a reputation for thoroughness that's unusual among Orks. Together, they represent the best technical minds the warband possesses, and they're going to need every bit of their skill to understand what they've found. They start with the external systems, examining the weapons and power plant without attempting to access the internal components. The assault cannon mounted on the dreadnought's right arm is a masterpiece of engineering, a rotating barrel system capable of firing thousands of rounds per minute. The ammunition feed is integrated directly into the chassis, suggesting massive internal storage. Scarfang runs his hands over the weapon, feeling the smooth metal, imagining the destruction it could unleash. The left arm bears a power fist, inactive but still impressive. The energy field generators are built into the fingers, designed to produce a disruptive field that can tear through any armor when activated. Grubnuts examines the hydraulics that power the arm, noting the reinforced structure that allows it to deliver crushing blows. This is a weapon designed to smash through fortifications, to tear apart enemy war machines, to reduce anything it touches to scrap. On the dreadnought's shoulder is a missile launcher, currently empty but clearly functional. The targeting systems are more sophisticated than anything the mech boys have seen before, integrated with the dreadnought's main optical sensors in a way that suggests incredible accuracy. Rustgut traces the wiring, trying to understand how the various systems connect, his mind working to map the machine's internal architecture. But it's the sarcophagus that draws their attention most strongly. Because even though they don't fully understand what they're looking at, the mech boys can tell that this is the heart of the machine. The heavily armored chamber at the dreadnought's center is clearly important, clearly sacred to whoever built this thing. The seals around it are complex, the armor thicker here than anywhere else on the chassis. Scarfang finds a panel on the sarcophagus that looks like it might provide access to the internal systems. It's covered in Imperial script, prayers and warnings that he can't read, but that clearly indicate importance. He pulls out a tool, a crude scanner of his own design, and runs it over the panel. The readings he gets back make his eyes widen. There's something alive in there, something that registers as organic tissue, sustained by the machine's systems. The mech boy doesn't understand what this means, doesn't grasp the concept of a pilot permanently integrated with his vehicle. But he recognizes that this changes everything. This isn't just a machine. It's something else, something that blurs the line between warrior and weapon. He shares his findings with the other mech boys, and they have a heated discussion in their native language, a guttural exchange of grunts and barks that passes for technical debate among orcs. Grubnuts wants to crack open the sarcophagus immediately to see what's inside, to understand how it all works. Rustgut counsels caution, arguing that they should study the external systems first, understand the machine's architecture before attempting invasive procedures. Scarfang, as the senior mech boy, makes the decision. They'll attempt to interface with the Dreadnought systems, to access its command protocols, to see if they can activate it without damaging whatever is inside the sarcophagus. If that works, they'll have a functional war machine. If it doesn't, they can always resort to more aggressive methods of investigation. The mech boys spend the next several hours working on the Dreadnought, their tools scraping and clanging against ancient ceramite as they attempt to access its systems. They find power conduits and trace them back to the main reactor. They locate data ports and try to interface with them using jury-rigged equipment. They examine every panel, every seal, every component they can reach, building a mental map of how the machine operates. What they're attempting to do is, by Imperial standards, impossible. The Dreadnought systems are encrypted, protected by layers of security protocols designed to prevent unauthorized access. The activation codes are known only to the chapter's tech marines, passed down through generations and guarded as jealously as any gene seed. Without these codes, without the proper rituals and prayers, the Dreadnought should remain inert, unresponsive to any attempt to wake it. But the mech boys aren't bound by such limitations. Their genetically encoded understanding of technology operates on principles that the Mechanicus would call heretical, but that nevertheless function. When Scarfang connects his scanner to one of the Dreadnought's data ports, his intuitive grasp of machines allows him to interpret signals that would be meaningless to anyone else. When Grubnuts hotwires a power conduit, his innate knowledge guides his hands to the right connections, even though he's never seen this particular configuration before. And underlying it all is the Ork Gestalt psychic field, because there are now several dozen orcs gathered in this chamber, all of them believing that the mech boys can get this thing working, all of them expecting to see their technical specialists perform miracles with salvage. That collective belief, that psychic pressure, begins to affect reality in subtle ways. Connections that shouldn't work suddenly do. Systems that should remain locked somehow become accessible. The laws of probability bend slightly in favor of the orc's success. It's during one of these interface attempts that something changes. Grubnuts has connected a power cable from their portable generator to one of the Dreadnought's secondary systems, trying to provide enough juice to activate its display panels. The energy flows into the ancient machine, bypassing some of the safety protocols, feeding into systems that have been dormant for 2 millennia. Deep within the Dreadnought, circuits that haven't carried current in centuries suddenly activate. The main power plant, operating in minimal standby mode for so long, begins to ramp up its output. The reactor temperature increases from its low idle state, fusion reactions resuming their normal cycle. Energy flows through the Dreadnought's frame, bringing dormant systems back online one by one. The life support systems check their status and find everything within acceptable parameters. The occupant is stable, biological functions nominal, neural interface intact. The combat systems run diagnostic routines, checking weapon status, armor integrity, mobility functions. The cognitive processors, those sophisticated computers that help translate the pilot's thoughts into action, begin their initialization sequences. And within the sarcophagus, surrounded by amniotic fluid that hasn't been changed in 2,000 years, floating in darkness that has lasted longer than most human civilizations, something stirs. A consciousness that has been absent returns. Thoughts that haven't formed in millennia suddenly coalesce. Awareness, distant and confused, begins to take shape. The ancient warrior is waking up. The first sensation is cold. Not the cold of temperature, though the amniotic fluid has cooled over the centuries, but a deeper cold, the kind that comes from having been nowhere for so long that existence itself feels foreign. For a time that could be seconds or could be eons, there is only this cold and the vague awareness that he is somehow present again. Then come the systems. One by one, his senses return. Not the senses of flesh, those were lost long ago in a battle he can barely remember, but the senses of the machine, the input from the Dreadnought sensors as they come back online and begin feeding data to his consciousness. He can see again, though what he sees makes no sense. The optical sensors show him a chamber he doesn't recognize, filled with figures that his cognitive systems identify as Orks. This triggers alarm protocols deep in his programming. Orks are enemies. Orks are Xenos. Orks are to be destroyed wherever they are found. But he cannot move yet. His control over the Dreadnought systems still incomplete as initialization continues. He tries to remember where he is, what his last orders were, how he came to be in this place. But memory is difficult. The long sleep has done something to his mind, fragmented his thoughts, made it hard to grasp the threads of past and present. He remembers fighting, always fighting. He remembers his chapter, though their name escapes him at the moment. He remembers the oath he swore, the promise to serve the Emperor until death or until relieved of duty. But he doesn't remember being relieved of duty. He doesn't remember standing down, which means he must still be in service, which means these Orks in his chamber are enemies to be destroyed. The Dreadnought's combat systems complete their initialization, weapon status, functional, armor integrity, acceptable despite minor degradation, mobility systems, operational, all primary systems reporting green, all secondary systems reporting green. The machine is ready for combat, and so is the warrior inside. Outside the sarcophagus, the mech boys are congratulating themselves on their success. They've managed to get the Dreadnought systems active, power flowing properly now, displays showing information they can't read but that clearly indicates they've accomplished something. Scarfang is grinning, showing off his metal teeth, already imagining the status this will bring him. The other Orks are cheering, making crude jokes about how Gutsmech is going to love this. They don't notice when the Dreadnought's optical sensors focus and track. They don't see the minute adjustments as the assault cannon's targeting system locks onto its first target. They don't recognize the warning signs that any tech marine would have spotted immediately, the subtle shifts in posture that indicate a Dreadnought transitioning from standby to combat mode. What they do notice is when the Dreadnought moves for the first time in 2,000 years. The ancient war machine takes a step forward, and the entire chamber shakes from the impact. Dust that has settled for centuries is thrown into the air. Orks who were standing too close are knocked aside by the sudden movement, and before anyone can react, before the reality of what's happening can fully register, the assault cannon begins to spin up. The sound is like nothing the Orks have ever heard. It's not the crude chatter of their own shooters or the roar of their big guns. It's a deep, mechanical whine building in intensity, the sound of a weapon designed by the finest craftsmen in the Imperium preparing to unleash hell. For a fraction of a second, the chamber is frozen in that moment of anticipation, that instant before violence erupts. Then the assault cannon fires. The weapon was designed to destroy light vehicles and shred infantry formations. Each shell is a work of precision engineering, propelled at velocities that allow it to penetrate armor plating and detonate inside the target. The assault cannon can fire up to 100 such shells per second, creating a stream of destruction that can soar through concrete walls or reduce a squad of soldiers to bloody mist. And it's currently pointed at a chamber filled with Orks. The first burst catches Grubnuts directly in the chest. The young mech boy doesn't even have time to scream before he's torn apart, his body reduced to chunks of green flesh and splintered bone. The shells continue past him, stitching across the chamber in a deadly arc that catches 3 more orcs who were standing behind him. Chaos erupts. Orcs, who moments ago were celebrating their find, are now running for the chamber exits, shouting warnings and curses in equal measure. The Dreadnought pivots, its targeting systems tracking fleeing targets with mechanical precision. The assault cannon fires again, its shells punching through an orc's back and exiting through his chest in a spray of blood and viscera. Scarfang, the senior mech boy, manages to dive behind a chunk of fallen masonry as the assault cannon's fury sweeps past him. Rustgut isn't so lucky. The older mech boy is caught in the open, and the stream of shells finds him. He takes 3 hits to the torso before he falls, his augmented body no match for weapons designed to kill space marines. The Dreadnought begins to walk forward, each step methodical and purposeful. It's not mindlessly attacking. The warrior inside is operating with the tactical awareness of centuries of combat experience. He's clearing his immediate area first, eliminating threats in order of proximity and danger. The orcs with guns are targeted first, then those with heavy weapons or unusual equipment, then the remainder in whatever order his targeting system suggests. Gutsmek Irontif, the war boss, is in the adjacent chamber when he hears the assault cannon fire. His immediate reaction is confusion. Why would the mech boys be testing the weapons in such an enclosed space? Followed rapidly by understanding as orcs begin fleeing past him with terror in their eyes. Something has gone very wrong. He charges toward the chamber, bellowing orders for his boys to form up and prepare for a fight. Whatever is happening in there, whatever has gotten the mech boys killed and the rest running scared, Gutsmek is going to crump it. He's the biggest, the meanest, the boss. And bosses don't run from fights. He reaches the chamber entrance just as the Dreadnought emerges from the dust and smoke. For a moment, Warboss and ancient warrior lock gazes, orc eyes meeting the cold red glow of optical sensors. Gutsmek takes in the full sight of the Dreadnought now that it's active and mobile. And even he has to admit it's an impressive piece of kit. Big, armored, covered in the scars of countless battles. The kind of thing that was made for crumping. The Dreadnought doesn't waste time with observation. It identifies Gutsmek as the largest orc, therefore the leader, therefore the priority target. The assault cannon swings toward the war boss and fires. But Gutsmek didn't become boss by being slow. He throws himself to the side as the shells tear through the space where he was standing a moment before. The incoming fire chews through the wall behind him, reducing ancient stonework to gravel. He comes up in a roll, his own shooter in his hands, and returns fire. Orc slugs bounce off the Dreadnought's armor without effect. The warboss knew that would happen. His gun isn't meant for cracking open something this tough, but he needs to keep the pressure on while his boys get into position. Because more orcs are arriving now, drawn by the sounds of combat like sharks to blood. If there's a fight happening, they want in on it. The ancient warrior inside the Dreadnought processes the tactical situation with the speed of long experience. Multiple hostiles, confined space, limited room to maneuver. His combat protocols suggest a fighting withdrawal to more advantageous terrain, while inflicting maximum casualties. But something else stirs in his consciousness, something beyond mere tactical calculation. Anger. These Xenos have violated his tomb. They've disturbed his rest. They've dared to lay their filthy hands on his sacred machine. 2,000 years of suppressed rage suddenly find an outlet. Centuries of frustration at being unable to die properly, of being denied the Emperor's peace, of being locked in this metal prison while his brothers found rest. The Dreadnought doesn't withdraw. It charges. The Power Fist comes alive with crackling energy as the Dreadnought crashes into the nearest group of orcs. The massive weapon swings down, and an orc simply ceases to exist, reduced to a red smear on the floor. The fist swings again, catching another orc in the ribs and sending him flying across the chamber to impact the wall with bone-shattering force. The assault cannon continues to fire, sweeping across targets even as the Power Fist does its brutal work. Shells tear through orc flesh, punch through the crude armor plates they wear, find vital organs and reduce them to jelly. The Dreadnought is a whirlwind of destruction, 2,000 years of stillness giving way to explosive violence. But the Orks aren't running anymore. They've gotten over their initial shock, and now they're doing what Orks do best, fighting back. Choppers ring against ceramite armor as they try to find gaps in the plating. Slugger rounds ricochet off the Dreadnought's chassis. One brave Ork manages to scramble onto the war machine's back, trying to find a way to damage the systems there. The Dreadnought spins, using its considerable mass to throw the Ork clear, then crushes him underfoot before he can recover. The power fist lashes out again, grabbing an Ork around the torso and squeezing. The greenskin's ribs crack and then shatter, his agonized scream cut short as the pressure crushes his lungs. More Orks are pouring into the chamber now. Some of them have shooters, others have choppers, a few have brought larger weapons. A rocket launcher fires, the crude missile streaking across the chamber to impact the Dreadnought's shoulder. The explosion staggers the war machine, actual damage done now, armor plates scorched, and one of the missile launcher's feed mechanisms damaged. The ancient warrior feels the hit, feels the pain that the Dreadnought's neural interface translates into something his organic brain can process. It's not like the pain of flesh, but it's real enough, a warning that his armor has been breached, that he's vulnerable. He retaliates with the assault cannon, targeting the Ork with the rocket launcher. The stream of shells tears the greenskin apart, along with two others standing nearby, but there are always more. For every Ork that falls, two more push forward, eager for their turn, excited by the violence, loving every second of this battle. Gutsmek has rallied his nobs, the elite warriors who form his inner circle. These are the toughest Orks in the warband, each one a veteran of countless fights, each one decked out in the best looted armor and gear. They form a rough semicircle around the Dreadnought, coordinating their attacks with a discipline unusual for Orks, but not unprecedented for nobs. One nob, a massive brute named Scarjaw, has a power claw, a crude but effective Ork weapon that generates its own disruptive energy field. He charges the Dreadnought from the side while it's focused on another target, and his claw tears into the war machine's leg. Sparks fly as the energy field disrupts the molecular bonds of the ceramite, allowing the physical blades to bite deep into the armor. The Dreadnought stumbles, its leg damaged, mobility compromised. The warrior inside redirects his attention, the power fist swinging towards Scarjaw. But the nob is already rolling away, his survival instincts honed by years of brutal combat. The fist impacts the floor instead, cracking the ancient stone. Another nob, this one wielding a big shooter, opens fire at point-blank range. Most of the rounds still bounce off the Dreadnought's armor, but a few find gaps where the plates meet, punching through to damage internal systems. Warning indicators flash in the warrior's consciousness, systems reporting malfunctions, efficiency dropping. The battle continues in this vein for what feels like hours, but is probably only minutes. The Dreadnought kills with methodical efficiency, its weapons never running dry, thanks to the massive ammunition reserves stored in its chassis. But the Orks keep coming, and each hit it takes, each wound it suffers, accumulates. The ancient war machine was built to last, but it wasn't built to fight an entire warband single-handedly while operating at the edge of its parameters. And then the Dreadnought makes a mistake. It's a small thing, a targeting error caused by a damaged sensor system. A split-second miscalculation that any warrior might make in the chaos of combat. The assault cannon swings toward a target that's no longer there, leaving an opening in the Dreadnought's defensive arc. And Gutsmek Ironteeth, who has been watching and waiting for exactly such an opportunity, explodes into motion. The war boss has his own power claw, a massive mechanical claw that he's used to tear apart everything from Imperial Guardsmen to Space Marine Terminators. He brings it to bear now, the energy field crackling as it activates, and drives it into the Dreadnought's damaged leg with all the strength his augmented muscles can provide. Metal screams as the claw tears through the weakened armor. Hydraulics rupture, spraying fluid across the chamber floor. The Dreadnought's leg buckles. The damage too severe for its systems to compensate. The ancient war machine crashes to one knee, still fighting, still firing, but its mobility essentially destroyed. And the Orks sense victory. They swarm over the fallen Dreadnought like ants on a wounded beetle. Choppers rise and fall, hacking at armor plates. Crude bombs are placed against the chassis and detonated at close range. The power claw wielders go to work on the joints and weak points, their weapons designed specifically to tear through armor. The warrior inside fights on with desperate fury. The assault cannon empties its last magazine into the press of Ork bodies, the weapon running dry for the first time in the battle. The power fist swings weakly, crushing another Ork, but lacking the force it had minutes ago. Systems are failing, power flowing to combat damage instead of weapons, the Dreadnought slowly being dismantled around him. He knows he's going to die. After 2,000 years of sleep, after waking to find his chapter gone and his world conquered by Xenos filth, after fighting one last battle in service to the Emperor, he's going to find the peace that has been denied him for so long. It's not the glorious death he might have wished for, not the heroic last stand with his brothers at his side, but it's death nonetheless, and after so long in this metal tomb, even that seems like mercy. But Gutsmek Ironteef has other ideas. The war boss calls off his boys just before they would have torn open the sarcophagus. He's watching the Dreadnought's struggles, seeing how the machine responds to damage, noting which systems are still functional, despite the beating it's taken. And an idea is forming in his mind. The kind of idea that separates a mere Ork from a war boss. He doesn't want to destroy this thing. He wants to own it. Through a combination of shouted orders, physical violence against Orks who don't obey quickly enough, and pure force of personality, Gutsmek manages to stop the destruction. The Orks pin the Dreadnought down, chains and cables wrapped around its limbs, heavy debris piled on top of it to prevent movement. The war machine struggles, the warrior inside still trying to fight, but with its leg destroyed and its power systems compromised, it can't break free. Scarfang, the senior mech boy who survived the initial carnage by hiding behind masonry, is dragged before Gutsmek. The war boss grabs him by the throat, lifting him clear off the ground despite the mech boy's own considerable size. "Can you fix it?" Gutsmek demands. Scarfang, quite reasonably terrified, nevertheless manages to examine the Dreadnought from his elevated position. The damage is severe but not catastrophic. The leg can be rebuilt, the damaged systems repaired or replaced. It would take time and resources, but yes, it can be fixed. More importantly, it can be improved. Because now that the Dreadnought is disabled, now that they can study it properly without getting shot at, the mech boy can see all sorts of interesting possibilities. The weapons could be upgraded, given more dakka, made proper Orky. The armor could be reinforced with plates from their battle wagons. The power system could be enhanced with a force field generator. And the whole thing could be painted in proper warband colors. "Yeah, boss," Scarfang manages to croak out. "I can fix it. Make it even better." Gutsmek drops the mech boy and grins, showing off his metal teeth. This is going to be good. This is going to be proper. He's going to have his very own Dreadnought, the only war boss in the sector with such a trophy. The other bosses are going to be so jealous. Inside the Dreadnought, the ancient warrior listens to the Orks planning their desecration of his sacred machine. He tries to activate his weapons, but the systems don't respond. He tries to move, but the chains hold firm, and his damaged leg won't support his weight. He tries to access his comm systems to call for help, but there's no one to call. His chapter is gone, and he's alone in the hands of the enemy. For the first time since awakening, he feels something worse than anger, worse than fury at the Xenos' violation. He feels despair, because he understands now what's going to happen. These Orks are going to take his Dreadnought apart and rebuild it in their image. They're going to desecrate everything he is, everything he represents. And there's nothing he can do to stop them. 2,000 years of service, 2 millennia of waiting for orders that never came. And this is how it ends. Not in glorious combat defending the Imperium, but captured by Xenos, his machine to be perverted and corrupted. It's worse than death. It's an insult to everything he fought for. But the Orks don't care about his anguish. They're already planning the modifications, arguing about which color to paint it, debating whether it needs more guns or if bigger guns would be better. To them, this is just another piece of salvage. Exceptional salvage to be sure, but salvage nonetheless. The next several weeks are a nightmare for the warrior inside the Dreadnought. The mech boys work on the machine constantly, taking it apart and putting it back together with Orky modifications. They remove entire systems they don't understand, replacing them with jury-rigged alternatives. They weld additional armor plates onto the chassis, crude slabs of metal painted in garish blue and red patterns. They modify the assault cannon, increasing its rate of fire at the cost of accuracy and reliability. The warrior tries to resist. When they're working on his neural interface, he attempts to fight back through the connection to make the systems reject their modifications. But the mech boys have disabled most of his control inputs, reducing him to a passive observer forced to watch as they violate his machine. They paint over his chapter's heraldry, the ancient symbols replaced with crude Ork glyphs. They add trophies to the chassis, skulls of enemies the warband has defeated. They install a crude Ork boss pole on the Dreadnought's back, a spiked banner that screams their clan affiliation to anyone who sees it. But the worst modification, the one that makes the ancient warrior scream in silent anguish, is when they start to crack open his sarcophagus. Not to kill him, the mech boys don't want to damage whatever makes this thing work. But they need access to the internal systems, need to understand how the organic components interface with the machine. Scarfang works carefully, more carefully than he's ever worked on anything, using tools that were meant for delicate electronics to unseal the armored tomb. The sarcophagus opens, and for the first time in 2,000 years, the warrior is exposed to air that isn't filtered through his life support systems. The amniotic fluid drains away, revealing what remains of his physical form. The Orks stare at the ruined body suspended in the mechanical cradle, the mass of scar tissue and cybernetic interfaces, the few remaining organic parts kept alive by machines more ancient than any of them. The warrior can see them now with his own eyes, or what remains of his eyes. The green faces, the crude features, the expressions of curiosity and greed. He tries to speak, to curse them, to invoke the Emperor's wrath upon their heads. But his throat doesn't work anymore, hasn't worked since the injury that put him in this machine. Only a wet, rasping sound emerges. Scarfang leans in close, examining the neural interfaces, trying to understand how they work. His crude scanner sweeps over the warrior's remaining flesh, analyzing, measuring, attempting to reverse engineer the Imperium's most sacred technology through brute force examination. And then the mech boy does something unexpected. He pulls back and looks at what remains of the warrior's face, really looks at it. And for just a moment, there's something in his expression that might almost be respect. Because even Orks understand warriors. Even Orks recognize someone who has fought and bled and refused to quit. This Hume might be their enemy, might be just salvage now, but he's a fighter. And fighters deserve respect. Scarfang seals the sarcophagus back up, more gently than strictly necessary. The warrior inside is plunged back into the familiar darkness of his mechanical tomb, back to the filtered air and recycled fluids. But something has changed. The mech boy's modifications, as crude as they are, have given him access to more of the Dreadnought's systems than he's had since being damaged. The Orks didn't mean to do it, but in their attempts to understand and improve the machine, they've partially restored his control. It's not much. He can't activate weapons or move the limbs, but he can access sensors, can see through the optical systems, can hear through the audio pickups. He's no longer completely blind and deaf, no longer entirely isolated, and with this small measure of control comes a small measure of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he can find a way out of this. The modification process continues for weeks. The mech boys repair the damaged leg, but their repair is more replacement than restoration. The elegant hydraulics and servo motors are ripped out and replaced with much cruder Ork equivalents, pistons and cables that work but lack the precision of the original systems. The result is functional but brutish, more in line with Ork mechanical philosophy than Imperial engineering. They enhance the power systems, adding a force field generator salvaged from one of their battle wagons. The field is crude and unreliable compared to Imperial void shields, but when it works, it provides an additional layer of protection. They install smoke launchers on the shoulders, systems that can deploy concealing clouds on command. They add a loudspeaker system so loud it can be heard over the roar of battle, perfect for broadcasting war cries and intimidating enemies. The assault cannon receives particular attention. The mech boys increase the rate of fire substantially, but at the cost of requiring more frequent maintenance and increasing the risk of catastrophic malfunction. They add a secondary weapon, a rocket launcher mounted on the power fist arm, giving the Dreadnought additional anti-armor capabilities. The targeting systems are replaced with simpler Ork equivalents that work well enough when the psychic field is strong, but would fail completely in the hands of a non-greenskin. Throughout all of this, Gutsmech watches with proprietary satisfaction. This is his Dreadnought now, his trophy, his war machine. He's already planning how to use it in battle, how to leverage its capabilities for maximum intimidation and killing power. The other war bosses in the region are going to lose their minds when they see this. But the warrior inside has been making plans too, because while the mech boys have been modifying the Dreadnought, he's been studying the modifications, learning the new systems, understanding how the Orks have changed his machine. And he's discovered something interesting. The Ork technology, as crude as it is, includes failsafes and emergency overrides. The mech boys installed them because even they recognize that uncontrolled mechanical systems are dangerous. These overrides are simpler than the Imperial equivalents, more accessible, especially to someone with direct neural interface to the machine. If he can access these overrides, if he can trigger them at the right moment, he might be able to seize control of the Dreadnought again. It would only be temporary. The Orks would quickly respond and shut down the systems. But temporary might be enough. A few seconds of control, that's all he needs. A few seconds to activate weapons, to strike at his captors, to at least take some of them with him before they destroy him completely. It's not escape, not really. There's nowhere for him to escape to, no chapter to return to, no Imperium to rejoin. But it's defiance, it's resistance. It's one last gesture of contempt toward the Xenos filth that have desecrated his tomb. And after 2,000 years of enforced service, after decades of humiliation at Ork hands, defiance is all he has left. The opportunity comes during a test of the modified systems. Gutsmech wants to see his new war machine in action before committing it to actual battle, so the Orks have set up a demonstration. They've assembled some targets, mostly scrap metal, and captured equipment from other raids, and they're going to run the Dreadnought through its paces. The warrior waits patiently as the mech boys activate the systems under their control. He feels power flowing through the chassis, weapons charging, motors engaging. The Dreadnought stands upright for the first time since the battle, its repaired leg holding steady despite the jury-rigged components. Gutsmech is shouting orders, telling the mech boys which targets to engage first. The Orks have gathered to watch, eager to see their boss's new toy in action. There's a festival atmosphere, Orks making bets about how quickly the targets will be destroyed. Gretchen's scurrying about with ammunition. The assault cannon spins up, its enhanced rate of fire evident in the higher-pitched whine it produces. The mech boys have it targeted at the first batch of scrap metal, a pile of wrecked vehicles that need to be destroyed anyway. The weapon fires, and even the Orks are impressed by the sheer volume of shells it vomits forth. The scrap pile is reduced to fragments in seconds, and in that moment, while the mech boys are focused on the successful test, while their attention is divided between the targets and their boss's reactions, the warrior makes his move. He triggers the overrides he's spent weeks learning to access. Emergency protocols that should require verbal commands respond instead to his neural inputs, fooled by his integration with the machine. Control surfaces that have been locked away from him suddenly open, and for the first time in weeks, he has full control of the Dreadnought again. The assault cannon swings away from the targets and toward the gathered Orks. The warrior has perhaps 3 seconds before the mech boys realize what's happening and shut down his access. 3 seconds to make every shot count. The weapon fires. The stream of shells tears through the crowd of Orks like a scythe through wheat. Bodies explode into fragments of green flesh and bone. The warrior doesn't waste ammunition on individual targets, instead sweeping the assault cannon in broad arcs that maximize casualties. Orks who were laughing and joking moments ago are suddenly dying. Their celebration turned into slaughter. 2 seconds remaining. The power fist comes alive, energy field crackling. The Dreadnought takes a step forward, crushing an Ork beneath its foot, the power fist swinging down to obliterate another. The warrior is screaming inside his tomb, not words, but pure rage, 2,000 years of suppressed fury finding release. 1 second. The mech boys are frantically hitting shut-off switches, pulling connections, desperately trying to regain control. Gutsmech is bellowing orders, trying to organize a response, but chaos has erupted and Orks are scattering in all directions. 0. The system's locked down. The warrior's access is severed, crude Ork security protocols reasserting control. The Dreadnought freezes mid-stride, weapons falling silent, power fist deactivating. He's done all the damage he's going to do, but it was enough. 20 Orks lie dead or dying, victims of his brief rampage. Gutsmech's best knob took an assault cannon burst to the face and won't be getting up. One of the mech boys, not Scarfang, but another technician, was crushed by the power fist. The demonstration area looks like an abattoir, green blood painting the ground. Inside his tomb, the warrior experiences something he hasn't felt in a very long time. Satisfaction. They can modify his machine. They can paint over his chapter's colors. They can parade him around like a trophy. But they can't break him. They can't make him theirs. He's still a space marine, still a warrior of the Imperium, still loyal to the Emperor, even if everything else has been taken from him. Gutsmech Erontief stares at the frozen Dreadnought with an expression that's hard to read. Anger, certainly, at the deaths of his boys, but also something else. Something that might almost be respect, because this thing just killed 20 of his warriors while supposedly under control. Imagine what it could do if it was actually on their side, actually working with them instead of against them. An idea begins to form in the war boss's mind. Maybe they've been going about this wrong. Maybe instead of trying to control the Dreadnought like a vehicle, they should treat it more like a captured fighter. Maybe the thing inside can be convinced to actually fight for them instead of against them. It's a crazy idea, the kind of scheme that would get any other Ork laughed out of the warband. But Gutsmech didn't become war boss by playing it safe. And the potential payoff, an actually cooperative Dreadnought fighting on his side, is too good to pass up. He approaches the frozen war machine, standing in front of its optical sensors where he knows the thing inside can see him. He doesn't know if it understands Orkish language, probably not, but maybe it can get the gist through tone and gesture. "Listen, Humi," Gutsmech says, speaking slowly as if that will help. "You're dead good at fighting. Proper scary when you get going. But you're outnumbered, your lot are all dead, and you ain't got nowhere to go. So how's about this? You fight for me, and I'll let you fight. Not against you, with you. Think about it. All the scraps you can handle, all the enemies you can crump. Better than sitting in the dark waiting to die, yeah?" Inside the sarcophagus, the warrior listens to the incomprehensible Ork grunting and barking. He doesn't understand the words, but he understands the tone. He understands what this Xenos wants. And his answer would be the same in any language. Never. He would die before serving the enemies of the Imperium. He would rather rust in this tomb for another 2,000 years than raise his weapons in service to Xenos filth. The very suggestion is blasphemy, an insult to everything he is and everything he represents. Gutsmech sees something in the Dreadnought's optical sensor response. some hardening of resolution that tells him his offer has been rejected. He sighs, a surprisingly human gesture from such a brutal creature. Can't say he didn't try. "All right then," the war boss says. "Hard way it is." What follows is a battle of wills that spans months. The Orks continue to use the Dreadnought in combat, but only under the strictest controls. The warrior inside is kept locked out of the systems, reduced to a passenger while mech boys operate the war machine remotely. It's humiliating, being piloted like a vehicle instead of being allowed to fight, but the warrior endures. Between battles, Gutsmek tries different approaches. Sometimes he offers rewards, promising the warrior more freedom if he cooperates. Sometimes he threatens punishment, describing in graphic detail what will happen if the stubborn Humie doesn't get with the program. Sometimes he simply talks, rambling about battles and conquests, treating the Dreadnought like a fellow warrior instead of a prisoner. None of it works. The warrior inside remains implacable, refusing to cooperate, making clear through every action available to him that he will never willingly serve the Orks. And slowly, gradually, Gutsmek begins to realize that this particular prize might not be worth the effort, because maintaining the Dreadnought is expensive. It requires constant attention from mech boys who could be working on other projects. It demands ammunition and power cells that could supply multiple regular vehicles. And most importantly, it's become a source of tension in the warband. Some Orks think Gutsmek is wasting resources on a trophy that's more trouble than it's worth. Others are jealous of the attention the war boss lavishes on his pet Humie. After nearly a year of this standoff, Gutsmek makes a decision. He's going to use the Dreadnought for one last fight, a proper big scrap against a serious enemy. If it performs well, he'll keep it despite the hassle. If not, he'll let his boys tear it apart for useful components. Either way, the matter will be settled. The opportunity comes when scouts report a Space Marine strike force in the system. Not a full chapter, just a few squads conducting reconnaissance or hunting something. But Space Marines nonetheless, the very enemy this Dreadnought was built to fight alongside. It's perfect. Gutsmek assembles his entire warband for the attack. This is going to be the biggest scrap they've had in months, a chance to test themselves against the Imperium's finest. And he's bringing his Dreadnought, wants to see how the ancient warrior reacts when faced with his own kind. Inside his tomb, the warrior processes this information through the audio sensors that the Orks haven't bothered to fully disable. Space Marines, his brothers, or at least the inheritors of the legacy he once served. They're here, close enough to reach, close enough to signal. Hope, dangerous and painful, flares in what remains of his heart. If he can just make contact with them, if he can send some kind of signal that will let them know an Imperial Dreadnought is trapped in Ork hands, maybe they'll mount a rescue. Maybe he can finally be recovered, restored to proper service, given the dignity of fighting for the Imperium instead of being paraded around by Xenos. The battle begins in the early hours of dawn, Orks flooding out of their encampment toward the Space Marine position with all the subtlety of an avalanche. The Space Marines, outnumbered but far from outmatched, have established a defensive perimeter that channels the Ork advance into kill zones. Bolter fire tears through the first wave of Orks, explosive rounds detonating inside green bodies. Heavy weapons, las cannons and missile launchers target the Ork vehicles that rumble forward with the infantry. The Space Marines are disciplined, firing in controlled bursts, making every shot count. They've fought Orks before, know how to maximize casualties while conserving ammunition. Gutsmek's Dreadnought enters the battle from an unexpected angle, the mech boys piloting it toward the Space Marine flank. The assault cannon opens fire at range, shells arcing toward the defensive position. The Space Marines respond immediately, identifying the Dreadnought as a priority threat and shifting fire to engage it. But they're confused by what they're seeing. The Dreadnought's profile is wrong, too heavily modified, covered in Ork iconography. The heraldry that should identify its chapter is painted over with crude glyphs. It's moving with the Orks, fighting alongside them, its weapons targeting Imperial forces. Everything about the situation screams enemy combatant. Yet something feels off. The Dreadnought's movement patterns, the way it advances and seeks cover, even the firing patterns of its weapons, they all bear the hallmarks of Imperial training. Whatever this machine is, whatever it's become, it was built by the Imperium. And that makes the Space Marines hesitate just slightly, uncertain whether this is some kind of looted vehicle or something worse. The warrior inside is screaming through every available system, trying to override the mech boy control, trying to signal his brothers, trying to make them understand that he's still loyal, still one of them, still serving the Emperor despite his current circumstances. But the systems don't respond. The mech boys have him locked down tight, and all he can do is watch as his weapons fire on his own kind. It's the worst torture imaginable, worse than the modifications, worse than the long sleep, worse than being captured in the first place. To be forced to fight against the Imperium, to have his weapons used to kill Space Marines, to be unable to do anything but observe while he commits the ultimate betrayal, it breaks something inside him. A Space Marine armed with a lascannon takes aim at the approaching Dreadnought. The weapon charges, energy building in its capacitors. The shot is perfect, aimed at the joint where the jury-rigged Ork repairs meet the original Imperial chassis. The lascannon fires, and the beam punches through the weakened armor. Catastrophic damage. The Dreadnought staggers as hydraulics fail and power conduits rupture. The mech boys lose their remote connection as the systems they were using to maintain control are severed by the hit. And suddenly, unexpectedly, the warrior inside has control again. It's not a clean handoff. The Dreadnought is severely damaged, systems failing across the board. But for the first time since his brief rampage months ago, he can move under his own power, can control his own weapons. And he's going to use these final moments for what he should have done from the beginning. The assault cannon swings away from the Space Marine positions and toward the Ork forces. The warrior opens fire, not at maximum rate, but in controlled bursts, the firing pattern of an Imperial Dreadnought instead of an Ork weapon. He's sending a signal, the only signal he can, showing the Space Marines that whatever they're facing, it's not their enemy. The Space Marines see the change immediately. The Dreadnought has turned on its Ork handlers, its weapons now tearing through greenskin ranks with a precision that could only come from an Imperial pilot. Understanding dawns, horrible and clear. This isn't a looted vehicle. This is one of their own, captured and defiled, forced to fight against the Imperium. Orders crackle across the Space Marine Vox network. Cease fire on the Dreadnought, provide covering fire, prepare for recovery operations. Every Marine on that battlefield knows what must be done when one of their own is found in enemy hands. But the Orks aren't going to let their prize go without a fight. Gutsmek is leading a countercharge, his knobs at his side, determined to either reclaim the Dreadnought or destroy it. The warrior sees them coming, sees the fury on the warboss's face. This is going to be his last fight, one way or another. He doesn't run, he doesn't try to make it to the Space Marine lines. Instead, he turns to face the charging Orks, power fist raised, assault cannon spinning up. If he's going to die, he's going to die fighting. After 2,000 years of service, after a year of humiliation and captivity, he's going to end it the way a Space Marine should. As a warrior. The power fist crashes into Gutsmek Ironteeth, with all the force the damaged servos can muster. The warboss is thrown back, his armor cracked. But he's tough, and he's not done yet. Other Orks swarm the Dreadnought, power claws tearing at already damaged armor, rockets slamming into the chassis. The assault cannon fires until it runs dry, until the ammunition feeds are severed and the weapon falls silent. The power fist swings until the arm is torn off completely, ripped away by concentrated Ork firepower. The Dreadnought is coming apart, being dismantled by the same greenskins who rebuilt it, and the warrior welcomes it. A Space Marine Devastator squad opens fire with every heavy weapon they have. Lascannons, plasma cannons, missile launchers, all targeting the Orks clustered around the dying Dreadnought. The firepower is devastating, tearing through Ork forces, giving the ancient warrior covering fire in his last moments. Gutsmek, badly wounded but still fighting, manages to land one final blow with his power claw. The strike penetrates deep into the Dreadnought's chassis, cutting through vital systems, reaching toward the sarcophagus itself. Warning klaxons scream in the warrior's consciousness as life support begins to fail. But the Space Marines are charging now, bolters firing, their assault timed to relieve the Dreadnought before it falls completely. They crash into the Ork forces with the fury of avenging angels, their close combat weapons rising and falling in brutal efficiency. Gutsmek Ironteef, seeing his warband being torn apart and realizing the Humi Space Marines are more numerous than his scouts reported, makes the smart decision. He calls for a retreat, his surviving boys pulling back, leaving their prize behind. Better to lose the Dreadnought than lose everything. The Space Marines secure the area, establishing a perimeter while their apothecary approaches the fallen Dreadnought. The war machine is a ruin. Armor plates missing, weapons destroyed, systems failing. But inside the sarcophagus, the warrior still lives. The apothecary carefully opens the armored tomb, revealing the ancient warrior inside. 2,000 years old at minimum, possibly much older, covered in the scars of battles long forgotten. His organic parts are failing, the life support systems too damaged to sustain him much longer. The warrior's eyes, what remains of them, focus on the apothecary's helmet, the skull-faced symbol of the chapter's medical specialists, a sight he remembers from so long ago. He tries to speak, but his voice fails him, as it has for millennia. The apothecary understands anyway. This ancient hero, this warrior who has endured so much and suffered such indignities, has one final request. He wants to know if he served well. If despite everything, despite the capture and the humiliation and being forced to fight against the Imperium, he remained loyal, if he can still be counted among the Emperor's faithful servants. "Brother," the apothecary says, his voice gentle despite the vox distortion, "you have served beyond all measure of duty. You have endured what none should have to endure, and you remain true. The Emperor knows your sacrifice. We all do. Rest now. Your watch is ended." The warrior inside the ruined Dreadnought feels something he hasn't felt in longer than he can remember. Peace. His life support is failing, his body shutting down after being sustained by machines for so long. But he's not afraid. He's not angry. He's finally going to be allowed to rest. His consciousness fades slowly, the world growing distant. His last thoughts are not of battles or enemies or the long years of service. They're simpler than that, more fundamental. He thinks of his brothers, the Space Marines who fought beside him in that last battle. He thinks of the Emperor, distant and eternal, and he thinks that maybe, after everything, he did his duty after all. The apothecary watches as the readings flatline, as the ancient warrior passes into the Emperor's peace. Around him, other Space Marines have formed an honor guard, their helmets removed in respect for the fallen. This Dreadnought will be recovered, its remains returned to the chapter for proper interment. The warrior inside will be laid to rest with all the honors he deserves. Later, when the Space Marines report back to their chapter, the Tech Marines will examine the recovered Dreadnought with interest. The Ork modifications, crude as they are, demonstrate unexpected ingenuity. More importantly, the fact that the Orks were able to capture and modify an Imperial Dreadnought at all is concerning. It means they're learning, adapting, becoming more dangerous. But there's another legacy from this encounter, one that will spread through Ork culture in unexpected ways. Because Gutsmek Ironteef survived the battle, and he remembers what he learned from his captured Dreadnought, the power, the resilience, the sheer intimidation factor of having a warrior permanently integrated with a war machine. The concept already existed in Ork culture. They called them Deaf Dreads, combat walkers piloted by Orks, who volunteered to be permanently wired into the machines. but they were relatively rare, expensive to build and maintain. After Gutsmek's experience, after seeing firsthand what a proper dreadnought could do, more war bosses become interested in the concept. Mech boys start building more def dreads, incorporating lessons learned from examining the captured Imperial dreadnought. The designs become more sophisticated, more deadly, more closely mimicking the Imperial originals while maintaining their distinctly Orky character. The machines are still crude compared to their Imperial counterparts, still more likely to malfunction, still operated by pilots who are slowly going mad from being trapped in metal shells. But they work. And in the Ork way of thinking, that's all that matters. In some twisted way, the ancient warrior's final battle spawned a legacy. Not the legacy he would have wanted, not the honorable memory he might have hoped for. But a legacy nonetheless. Ork def dreads spreading across the galaxy, terror weapons inspired in part by one loyalist space marine who refused to break even under the worst circumstances imaginable. The Orks themselves tell the story in their own way, embellishing it with each retelling until it bears little resemblance to actual events. In their version, Gutsmek Irontif fought the Humi in the metal box single-handedly, crumped him proper, and took the best bits to make his own war machine even better. The fact that the actual dreadnought was lost and Gutsmek barely escaped with his life is conveniently forgotten. But some mech boys remember the truth, or at least a version of it. They remember that the Humi in the metal box fought with a fury that even Orks could respect. They remember that it never gave up, never stopped fighting, even when it was outnumbered and outgunned and had no hope of victory. And in their own way, they honor that memory by trying to build def dreads that can match that legendary ferocity. It's a strange kind of tribute, twisted and perverse by any Imperial standard, but it's the only kind of immortality available to a warrior whose name has been forgotten, whose chapter is extinct, whose service records are lost to time. He lives on in the nightmares of Ork mech boys, in the designs they sketch and the machines they build, in the legend of the Humi who wouldn't quit even when all hope was gone. And perhaps, in the grim darkness of the far future, that's enough. The fate we've described is just one possibility, one way events might unfold when Orks discover a dormant dreadnought. But the galaxy is vast and circumstances vary. Let's explore some alternative scenarios, different paths this encounter might have taken, depending on the specific conditions and the characters involved. In another version of events, the dreadnought might never wake up at all. Perhaps the Orks lack the technical skill to activate it, or perhaps they're too impatient to figure out the complex systems. Instead of fighting a functioning war machine, they simply strip it for parts, while the warrior inside remains in stasis, unaware of his violation. This is perhaps the most tragic outcome. The ancient hero continues his endless sleep while his sacred machine is dismantled around him. The Orks take the weapons to mount on their own vehicles. They use the armor plating to reinforce their fortifications. They pull out the power cells and reactor components for study. And eventually, when they've taken everything of value, they discard the sarcophagus itself, tossing it onto a scrap heap where it will rust for another 1,000 years. The warrior inside never knows what happened. He simply continues sleeping, his stasis systems maintaining him on emergency power, waiting for activation codes that will never come. Perhaps eventually the power fails completely, and he dies in his sleep, consciousness fading without ever realizing his tomb has become a ruined shell. Or perhaps he sleeps on forever, preserved but abandoned, a forgotten relic on a world no one remembers. Alternatively, the Orks might successfully convert the dreadnought into a fully functional looted wagon. In this scenario, their mech boys are skilled enough to override the Imperial control systems entirely, to rip out the original programming and replace it with their own crude equivalents. The warrior inside is either killed during the conversion process or reduced to a vegetative state, his consciousness damaged beyond recovery by the brutal modifications. The result is a machine that looks like a dreadnought, but functions like an Ork vehicle. It's piloted by a regular Ork driver, one who simply sits in a modified cockpit, bolted to the chassis instead of being neurally integrated. The weapons work through standard Ork firing mechanisms. The movement is controlled by levers and pedals. The whole thing operates on principles that would make a tech marine weep. But it's effective in its own way. This looted Dreadnought becomes a terror weapon in the Ork warband, a symbol of their ability to take Imperial technology and make it their own. Other war bosses see it and want their own versions. Before long, looted Dreadnoughts become a recognized type of Ork vehicle, spreading across the sector as the idea catches on. Or consider a scenario where the Space Marines arrive much sooner. Perhaps they're tracking this particular Dreadnought, knowing it was lost during their chapter's last stand on this world. They've come specifically to recover it, to return their fallen brother to the chapter for proper honors. They find the Orks just beginning their excavation before the Dreadnought has been damaged or modified. A swift assault secures the area, killing the greenskins before they can activate or harm the ancient war machine. The Space Marines carefully extract the Dreadnought from its tomb, performing the proper rituals of awakening under controlled conditions. The warrior wakes to find himself surrounded by his brothers, or at least by Space Marines wearing the same colors and heraldry he remembers from so long ago. He's confused, disoriented, unable to reconcile his memories of the chapter's last stand with the fact that the chapter apparently still exists. But he's safe, recovered, returned to Imperial service. In this outcome, the Dreadnought is restored to full functionality by chapter tech Marines who actually understand the technology. The warrior inside is able to serve his remaining years with dignity, fighting in battles chosen by his own commanders rather than at the whim of Xenos captors. When he finally falls in combat, it's as a hero defending the Imperium, his name added to the chapter's rolls of honor. Or perhaps the story takes an even darker turn. What if the Orks don't just modify the Dreadnought, but actively torture the warrior inside? What if they figure out how to stimulate his neural interfaces, to cause pain without killing him, to break his will through systematic psychological warfare? In this nightmare scenario, the warrior endures not just captivity, but active torment. The Orks don't just want to use his machine, they want to break him, to turn him into a willing servant of their war boss. Day after day, they inflict agony through his neural connections. They show him images of the Imperium's defeats. They whisper lies about the Emperor's supposed death and the Imperium's fall. Some warriors might eventually break under such treatment, their minds fragmenting after years of systematic abuse. Others might find ways to resist, to retreat into madness rather than betray their oaths. Either way, the result is a tragedy, a hero reduced to a broken shell of his former self. There's also the possibility of unexpected allies. Perhaps other Imperial forces are operating in the area. Not Space Marines, but Imperial Guard, or Mechanicus tech priests. They discover the Ork excavation and realize what's at stake. A desperate rescue mission is mounted. Imperial forces fighting to recover the Dreadnought before the Orks can fully secure it. In this version, the battle is more evenly matched. The Imperial forces lack the individual prowess of Space Marines, but they make up for it with numbers and proper equipment. The Orks are caught off guard, their excavation site becoming a battlefield. The Dreadnought, activated during the fighting, finds himself in the middle of a three-way conflict, trying to support the Imperial forces while keeping himself operational long enough for a proper recovery. Or consider a scenario where the Dreadnought is so ancient, so damaged by the long sleep, that when it wakes, it's no longer entirely sane. The warrior inside has degraded mentally to the point where he can't distinguish friend from foe. He attacks everyone, Orks and potential Imperial rescuers alike, seeing only enemies in his paranoid delusions. This berserker Dreadnought becomes a terror on the battlefield, but not in a controlled or useful way. It's a hazard to everyone nearby, its weapons firing at random, its movement erratic and unpredictable. Eventually it has to be put down, either by the Orks who refuse to waste resources on something so unreliable, or by Imperial forces who recognize that the warrior inside is beyond saving. In yet another possibility, the Orks might succeed in their original plan of getting the warrior to cooperate. Perhaps through some combination of circumstance and persuasion, the ancient hero finds himself fighting alongside the greenskins against a common enemy. Maybe a chaos incursion threatens the world, and the warrior decides that even orcs are preferable to the ruinous powers. Maybe he's convinced, rightly or wrongly, that his chapter is truly gone and the Imperium has fallen, leaving him with no loyalty to maintain. This outcome is perhaps the most tragic of all, because it represents not just the loss of the Dreadnought, but the corruption of the warrior's legacy. A space marine fighting for Xenos, even temporarily, even for seemingly good reasons, is a betrayal of everything the Imperium stands for. Whether he's forced into it or chooses it voluntarily, the result is the same: a hero's fall from grace. But perhaps the most interesting scenario is one where the Dreadnought's presence fundamentally changes the Ork warband. The warrior inside, through his defiance and his skill in combat, earns a kind of grudging respect from the Orks that transcends the usual enemy-prisoner relationship. He becomes, in the Ork way of thinking, an honorary member of the warband, a fighter whose prowess demands acknowledgement. In this version, a strange relationship develops between the warrior and his captors. He's still a prisoner, still kept under strict control, but he's also valued for his expertise. The war boss consults him before major battles, using his tactical knowledge to plan attacks. The mech boys study his fighting techniques, learning from his use of the Dreadnought's weapons. The ordinary orcs tell stories about the Humi in the metal box who fights like a proper orc. It's not friendship, not really. The warrior still hates his captors, still seeks any opportunity to escape, or at least to die fighting. But there's a kind of mutual respect, the acknowledgement that warriors on opposite sides can recognize skill and courage in each other. When the warrior eventually falls in battle, the orcs give him what passes for an honorable burial in their culture, marking the spot where the metal Humi finally stopped fighting. Each of these scenarios highlights different aspects of the Dreadnought concept and orc culture. They show us the incredible resilience of these war machines, the tragedy of warriors who cannot die, the strange honor codes that exist even among brutal Xenos. They remind us that in the grim darkness of the far future, there are worse fates than death. The existence of Def Dreads, the orc equivalent of Imperial Dreadnoughts, is itself a testament to the impact these machines have had on the galaxy. Whether through direct copying as in our main story, or through independent development, or through the kind of technological osmosis that happens when cultures clash repeatedly, the orcs have created their own version of walking tombs for warriors too valuable to abandon. But Ork Def Dreads are fundamentally different from their Imperial counterparts in ways that reflect the differences between the two cultures. An Imperial Dreadnought is created with reverence, the internment treated as a sacred honor. The warrior inside is a hero, carefully selected, his consciousness preserved with all the skill the Mechanicus can muster. He serves willingly, motivated by duty and faith. An Ork Def Dread is created with brutal practicality. The pilot volunteers because being welded into a war machine makes him bigger and more dangerous, which is the orc definition of success. He's not carefully selected for valor or wisdom. He just happens to be the orc who wants it most when a slot becomes available. And he's going to regret that decision pretty quickly. Because being a Def Dread pilot is miserable even by orc standards. The internment process is painful. The Pain Boy and Mech Boy collaborating to wire the orc's nervous system directly into the machine's controls. There's no sophisticated neural interface, no gentle integration of biology and technology. It's crude surgery followed by welding the pilot into the cockpit so he can't get out even if he wanted to. Once installed, the orc pilot discovers that his new metal body is hot, loud, cramped, and uncomfortable. The visibility is terrible, just a narrow slit to see through. The controls are awkward and difficult to master. And worst of all, he's stuck in there permanently. He can't get out for a drink. He can't get out to fight in a proper scrap. He has to fight from inside his metal prison. He can't even scratch an itch without help. This drives Ork Def Dread pilots a little bit crazy. a condition the Orks call running in. During this phase, the pilot becomes increasingly erratic and violent, lashing out at anything nearby just to relieve the frustration of his confinement. Other Orks give deaf dreads a wide berth when they're running in, knowing that the pilot is likely to attack friend and foe with equal enthusiasm. But in battle, all that pent-up rage and frustration finds an outlet. The deaf dread pilot throws himself into combat with abandon, reveling in the destruction he can cause, temporarily forgetting his miserable existence in the joy of crumping things. And this is when deaf dreads earn their keep, because a properly motivated Ork in a walking war machine is a terrifying force on the battlefield. Deaf dreads are equipped with an absurd amount of weaponry, even by Ork standards. They commonly carry 4 guns, 1 on each arm, plus shoulder-mounted weapons, big shooters, scorchers, rocket launchers, claws, saws. The mech boys just keep adding weapons until there's no more room. The result is a mobile platform that can engage at any range and in any role, trading precision and reliability for sheer volume of fire. The construction of a deaf dread requires the cooperation of 2 different types of odd boys: the mech boy, who builds the chassis and installs the weapons, and the pain boy, who handles the biological integration of the pilot. This partnership is essential, but often contentious, as mech boys and pain boys have different priorities and frequently disagree about the proper ratio of machine to Ork in the final product. The resulting machines are as individual as the Orks who create them. No 2 deaf dreads look quite the same, each one customized according to the builder's preferences and available materials. Some are tall and spindly, built for speed and intimidation. Others are squat and heavily armored, designed to absorb punishment while advancing. All of them are loud, covered in spikes and glyphs, painted in colors that make them visible from orbit. When deployed in battle, deaf dreads serve as mobile fire support platforms and assault units. They're tougher than regular Ork vehicles, but more expensive to build and maintain. A war boss who can afford multiple deaf dreads is showing off his wealth and power, demonstrating that he has the resources to waste on such specialized equipment. The pilots inside these machines become legendary figures within their warbands. The longest-serving deaf dread pilots, those who somehow manage to avoid getting killed despite putting themselves in the most dangerous situations, earn respect and status. Other Orks tell stories about their exploits, exaggerating the number of enemies killed and the odds overcome. But there's also a tragic element to deaf dread culture, because eventually, every deaf dread pilot meets one of 2 fates. Either they die in battle, their machine finally overwhelmed by enemy fire and the pilot killed inside his tomb, or they survive long enough that the madness of confinement becomes complete, reducing them to mindless berserkers who have to be put down by their own warband. There's no retirement for a deaf dread pilot, no honorable end of service. They fight until they die, period. And while Orks don't generally fear death, there's something about the specific fate awaiting deaf dread pilots that gives even the most enthusiastic volunteers pause, which is probably why, despite the obvious advantages of being in a deaf dread, there's rarely a shortage of machines waiting for pilots. The relationship between Imperial dreadnoughts and Ork deaf dreads is a kind of dark mirror. Both are walking tombs for warriors too valuable to abandon. Both represent cultures that value martial prowess above almost everything else. Both demonstrate a willingness to sacrifice individual comfort and happiness for combat effectiveness. But where Imperial dreadnoughts are created with reverence and sorrow, deaf dreads are built with enthusiasm and a certain disregard for the pilot's future well-being. Where Imperial pilots serve willingly out of duty, Ork pilots volunteer because it seems like a good idea at the time and regret it later. Where Imperial dreadnoughts are maintained with religious devotion, deaf dreads are repaired with whatever's handy and a generous application of percussive maintenance. It's this fundamental difference in approach that makes deaf dreads simultaneously more expendable and more dangerous than their Imperial counterparts. An Imperial dreadnought is a treasured relic, deployed carefully and recovered at all costs. A death dread is a disposable asset, thrown at the enemy with abandon and abandoned if recovery proves difficult. Yet both serve the same basic function. They allow warriors to continue fighting long after their natural bodies would have failed. They provide mobility and protection to damaged fighters who would otherwise be helpless. They terrify enemies and inspire allies, and they represent the grim determination of their respective cultures to wage war, no matter the cost. As we bring our exploration to a close, we're left with a question that has no easy answer. What would you do in the ancient warrior's position? Awakening after centuries to find your chapter gone, your world conquered, yourself in enemy hands. Would you resist to the bitter end as our warrior did? Would you seek compromise, trading cooperation for survival? Would you retreat into madness rather than face the unbearable reality? There are no good options, no choices that don't come with terrible costs. Resistance means suffering and eventual death. Cooperation means betraying everything you believe in. Madness means losing yourself completely. Each path leads to tragedy, just different flavors of it. But perhaps that's the point. Because Warhammer 40,000 is a universe defined by its grim darkness, by the absence of good options, by the requirement that everyone make impossible choices and live with the consequences. The ancient warrior, in his captured Dreadnought, is just one more example of this, one more story of duty and sacrifice and the price paid by those who serve. His fate, whatever form it ultimately takes, is a reminder that in the galaxy of the 41st millennium, there is only war. There is no peace, no retirement, no happy endings. There is only service until death. And sometimes, not even death provides release. And yet, even in this darkness, there are moments of light. The warrior who refuses to betray his oaths despite years of torture. The space marines who risk themselves to recover a fallen brother. The grudging respect between enemies who recognize each other's courage. These small acts of honor and humanity, flickering candles in an ocean of darkness, are what make the setting compelling despite its bleakness. The story of Orks discovering a dormant dreadnought is, at its core, a story about identity and purpose. Who are we when everything we knew is gone? What defines us when our external circumstances change beyond recognition? Can we maintain our principles when holding to them brings only suffering? For the ancient warrior, the answer was clear. He remained loyal because that's who he was, a space marine of the Imperium, servant of the Emperor. No amount of modification to his body, no length of captivity, no forced participation in battles against his own kind could change that fundamental identity. He was loyal because he chose to be, because the alternative was to become something he couldn't accept. For the Orks, the Dreadnought represented something else entirely. It was loot, a prize, a trophy that demonstrated their ability to take from the Imperium and make it their own. They didn't understand the tragedy of what they'd found, didn't comprehend the violation they were committing. To them, it was just another piece of salvage, exceptional in quality, but not fundamentally different from a captured tank or looted weapon. This disconnect, this complete failure of understanding between the two sides, is itself a microcosm of the larger conflict between the Imperium and the Ork menace. They don't just fight over resources or territory. They fight because they literally cannot comprehend each other's motivations, cannot find common ground, cannot even agree on what matters. And in the end, that might be the most tragic aspect of the entire scenario. Not just that the warrior suffered, though he certainly did. Not just that the Orks violated something sacred, though they absolutely did. But that neither side could ever truly understand what the other had lost and gained in their encounter. The warrior lost his freedom, his dignity, his chapter, everything except his identity and his faith. The Orks gained a powerful weapon, lessons in technology, and a legendary story to tell. Neither could appreciate what the other valued. Neither could understand why the other made the choices they did. They were aliens to each other in every sense of the word. Before we conclude, I want to encourage you to engage with this content and this channel. If you found this exploration of orcs discovering a dreadnought interesting, if these stories of honor and tragedy in the grim darkness of the far future resonate with you, please take a moment to like this video. It helps the algorithm show this content to other fans of Warhammer 40,000 who might enjoy it. Consider subscribing to Stories of Hammer for more deep dives into the lore of this incredible universe. We explore the stories that make Warhammer 40,000 compelling, the tragedies and triumphs of warriors across a million worlds, the dark corners of the galaxy where few dare to look. Every subscription helps us continue creating this content, helps us justify the time spent researching and writing these scripts. And if you really want to support what we do here, consider sharing this video with fellow fans. Post it in your Warhammer communities, send it to friends who love the lore. Help spread these stories to people who will appreciate them. Word of mouth is the best advertisement we could ask for. The universe of Warhammer 40,000 is vast beyond comprehension, filled with countless stories waiting to be told. The fate of a single dreadnought discovered by orcs is just one thread in this infinite expanse. But it's threads like these, individual stories of courage and suffering, that make the setting feel alive, that give weight to the endless wars and meaning to the sacrifices. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of what happens when orcs find a dreadnought that's been asleep for centuries. May your dice roll well, your paintbrushes remain steady, and your armies bring glory to the Emperor. Until next time, this is Stories of Hammer, reminding you that in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But in that war, there are still stories worth telling. Stories of warriors who refuse to break. Stories of duty that transcends death. Stories of the price we pay for the choices we make. And sometimes, just sometimes, stories of hope flickering in the darkness. Small lights that refuse to be extinguished, no matter how deep the shadow. The ancient warrior in his dreadnought, whether he found death in battle against his captors, rescue by his brothers, or some other fate entirely, represents the best of what the Imperium claims to be, not the bureaucracy or the cruelty or the endless grinding of human lives in the machine of war, but the individual who chooses duty over comfort, honor over life, faith over despair. That's the real power of dreadnoughts in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. They're not just weapons or walking tanks or cool miniatures for your tabletop army, though they're certainly all of those things. They're symbols of what it means to serve beyond the limits of mortality, to maintain your purpose when everything else has been taken from you, to be more than just flesh and blood. And when orcs discover these symbols, when they try to corrupt them and pervert them and make them into something they're not, it becomes a conflict, not just of weapons, but of philosophies. The Imperium's reverence for the past versus the orcs' focus on the present. Duty versus pragmatism. Order versus chaos. Neither side can win completely because they're fighting over things the other side doesn't even value. But the fight continues anyway, as it has for 10,000 years, as it will for 10,000 more. Dreadnoughts will fall and be recovered or lost. Orcs will loot and modify and build their own crude copies. Space Marines will fight to reclaim what's theirs and avenge what cannot be reclaimed. The cycle repeats endlessly, another turn of the great wheel of war that defines the 41st millennium. And somewhere, in some forgotten ruin on some abandoned world, another dreadnought sleeps, waiting for orders that may never come. Dreaming dreams that aren't really dreams, serving an Imperium that might not even remember he exists, until the orcs come digging. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, but in that war, there are these moments, these encounters between ancient warriors and savage scavengers that reveal deeper truths about both, about what we value, about what we're willing to sacrifice, about who we choose to be when everything is taken from us. The story of the Dreadnought and the Orks is many things. It's an adventure. It's a tragedy. It's a philosophical meditation on duty and identity. It's a cautionary tale about the price of service. It's a celebration of unwavering faith. It's a condemnation of the Imperium's callousness. It's an examination of Ork culture from an unusual angle. But most of all, it's a reminder that in this vast, dark, terrible galaxy, individual choices still matter. The warrior who chose to resist, the war boss who chose to loot, the space marines who chose to rescue. Each decision ripples outward, affecting others, creating consequences that echo through the years. And that's why these stories matter. Not because they change the fate of the galaxy, most of them don't, but because they show us that even in a universe designed to crush hope and grind down individuals, people and orcs, and yes, even ancient warriors locked in metal tombs, still make choices, still exercise agency, still matter. Thank you for listening to this exploration of Orks discovering ancient dreadnoughts. May the Emperor watch over you. May your war cries be fierce, and may your stories always be worth telling. This has been Stories of 40k, and remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, every relic has a story, every tomb has an occupant, and every discovery has consequences. Stay grimdark, my friends.